You've been pulling away from people and you don't know why. Not dramatically, not with anger or conflict, just quietly. You cancel plans with a text that sounds reasonable. You let messages sit unanswered for days. You choose the couch over the dinner invitation, the silence over the conversation, the screen over the gathering. And every time you do it, there's a small voice that asks, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? Why does everything feel like too much effort when it used to feel effortless?" You look around at others who seem to move through social life with ease, who post about their gatherings and their friendships, who appear energized by connection rather than drained by it, and you wonder if something inside you has broken. If you've become antisocial, if you're depressed, if you're letting everyone down, if you're becoming someone you don't recognize. The isolation doesn't feel like a choice, but it also doesn't feel entirely forced. It exists in some strange middle territory where you're both relieved to be alone and guilty about that relief, where you crave connection in theory but recoil from it in practice, where the idea of deep conversation sounds appealing until someone actually tries to have one with you, and then you feel exposed, exhausted, like you're performing a version of yourself that no longer fits. This is where most people stop and diagnose themselves. They open the mental health checklist. They Google symptoms. They read articles about attachment styles and trauma responses and neurodivergence. They convince themselves that withdrawal equals pathology, that distance equals dysfunction, that if they were healthy, they would want what they wanted before. They interpret the shift as evidence of decline, of something lost, of something damaged. And maybe you've done this too. Maybe you've tried to explain yourself in therapeutic language, tried to find the wound that's making you retreat, tried to identify the fear, or the pattern, or the childhood origin point that would make this all make sense. But what if that entire framework is wrong? What if you're not moving away from health but toward it? What if the isolation isn't a symptom of weakness but a signal of evolution? What if the version of you that needed constant external validation, constant stimulation, constant proof of belonging was the fragile one, and the version of you that can sit in silence without panic is actually becoming stronger? Mary Ainsworth spent years studying attachment, watching how children responded to separation from their caregivers, categorizing the patterns of distress and reunion. But what most people miss in her work is this: secure attachment isn't about never being apart. It's about being able to tolerate separation without collapsing. It's about carrying the connection internally, rather than needing it externally confirmed every moment. The securely attached child can play alone because they trust the bond. Exists even when the parent isn't in the room. They don't need constant reassurance because the foundation is stable. Now apply that to your adult life. For years, maybe decades, you maintained relationships that required constant tending. Friendships that demanded regular check-ins or they'd wither. Social circles where your worth was measured by your presence, your participation, your willingness to show up and perform connection. You were the one who remembered birthdays, who initiated plans, who made sure no one felt left out. You were the glue. And it worked for a while. It felt good to be needed. It felt safe to be part of something. But it also required a version of you that was always slightly performing, always slightly managing, always slightly afraid that if you stopped, everything would fall apart. That version of connection wasn't actually connection. It was dependency dressed up as intimacy. It was a system where your value was transactional, where love was conditional on effort, where belonging required you to diminish parts of yourself to fit the shape others needed. You didn't see it at the time because you were inside it, because everyone around you was operating from the same template, because this is what we're taught connection is supposed to look like, but your nervous system saw it. Your body kept score, and at some point, without your conscious permission, something inside you said, no more. Not with anger, not with judgment, just with quiet, clear refusal. The part of you that was bending started to straighten. The part of you that was performing started to rest. The part of you that was managing everyone else's emotions started to put down the responsibility. And from the outside, From the perspective of the old system, this looks like withdrawal. It looks like you're becoming cold, distant, unavailable. But from the inside, from the perspective of your actual development, this is integration. This is you becoming whole enough that you no longer need external structures to hold you together. Think about how a seed grows. It starts in darkness and soil, completely alone. If you dug it up to check on it, to make sure it was okay, to give it companionship, you would destroy it. The isolation isn't punishment, it's protection. It's the necessary condition for the internal work that can't happen in the noise of constant interaction. You are not broken for needing this. You are not failing for pulling away. You are reorganizing at a level so deep that it can't happen while you're still performing the old patterns. But here's where people make the mistake. They feel the discomfort of the transition and try to force themselves back into the old life. They guilt themselves into social obligations. They override the quiet no inside them because they think it's depression talking, or fear talking, or laziness talking. They interpret the need for space as something to be fixed rather than something to be honored. And so they go back to the gatherings, back to the group chats, back to the performance of connection, and they feel worse. Because now they're not just disconnected from others, they're disconnected from themselves. They've betrayed the very instinct that was trying to protect them. If you liked this video so far, consider hitting the like button. It helps more people find content like this when they need it most. The intensity you used to get from social life, that rush of belonging, that sense of being seen and known, it wasn't inherently bad. But it was dependent on contrast. It required you to feel uncertain about your place so that confirmation of your place could feel like relief. It required you to doubt your worth so that external validation could feel like proof. It required you to be slightly destabilized so that connection could feel like rescue. This is how most relationships function. Not because people are malicious, but because we're taught to build connection on top of lack. We bond through shared insecurity. We create intimacy by exposing wounds. We maintain closeness by needing each other to fill gaps we haven't learned to fill ourselves. And it works until it doesn't. Until you grow enough that the gaps start closing on their own. Until you stabilize enough that you don't need rescue. Until you integrate enough that external validation stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like noise. This is what's happening to you. You're not losing the capacity for connection. You're losing the need for a certain kind of connection. The kind that required you to stay small to keep everyone comfortable. Imagine you've been living in a house with thin walls. Every sound from outside comes through. Every voice, every car, every conversation. At first it felt alive. It felt like you were part of something, connected to the world. But over time the noise became overwhelming. You couldn't think. You couldn't rest. You couldn't hear your own thoughts over the constant input. So you started closing windows, putting up thicker walls, creating barriers between you and the outside. And from the outside, it looks like you're shutting people out. But from the inside, you're finally able to hear yourself. You're finally able to exist without constant interference. The isolation isn't rejection of the world. It's reclamation of your internal space. And that space, that quiet, it feels strange at first, because you've been conditioned to equate silence with loneliness, stillness with stagnation, solitude with failure. But silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been too busy to notice, full of thoughts you've been too distracted to hear, full of a version of yourself that doesn't need to be anyone for anyone. Subscribe if you want more videos that explore the uncomfortable truths about personal growth that no one else is talking about. You're in a gap between the old way of being and whatever comes next. The old way doesn't work anymore. You can feel it. When you try to re-engage with the relationships and activities that used to fulfill you, there's a flatness. Not sadness, exactly. Just absence. Like watching a movie you loved as a child and realizing it doesn't move you the same way. The meaning has drained out. The magic has gone. And you can't force it back. You can't pretend your way into caring. You can't will yourself to feel what you felt before. Because you're not the same person you were before. The structure of your inner world has changed. What used to resonate now feels hollow. What used to excite now feels exhausting. What used to fulfill now feels insufficient. And the most disorienting part is that you don't yet know what the new thing is. You don't have a replacement. You don't have a clear vision of the life that's supposed to come next. You're just standing in the space where the old life used to be, and it's empty, and you're waiting for something to fill it, but nothing comes. And this is where the panic sets in for most people. This is where they start searching frantically for the next thing, the next relationship, the next project, the next identity, the next source of meaning. They can't tolerate the emptiness. They can't sit in the not knowing. So they rush to fill it with anything just to stop the discomfort. And they end up building a new version of the old life, with different details but the same structure, and the cycle repeats. Don't do that. Don't rush. Don't fill the space just because it feels empty. Let it be empty. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it be strange and disorienting and uncertain. Because this gap, this transition, it's not a problem to be solved. It's a process to be lived. You're not supposed to understand it yet. You're not supposed to have answers yet. You're supposed to be exactly where you are, in between, uncertain, alone, and learning to be okay with that. The quality that's emerging in you now, it's not what you expected. It's not happiness in the way you used to define it. It's not excitement or passion or enthusiasm. It's quieter than that, more constant, less dramatic. It's a kind of okayness that doesn't depend on anything external. A baseline sense of sufficiency that isn't tied to achievement or validation or connection. It's the felt experience of being enough, not as a concept you've convinced yourself of, but as a lived reality you can't deny. And it's boring. That's the honest truth. It's boring compared to the highs and lows you used to live for. It doesn't give you stories to tell. It doesn't create drama. It doesn't make you feel alive in the way intensity used to make you feel alive. But it also doesn't abandon you. It doesn't spike and crash. It doesn't require constant maintenance. It's just there, steady, like a floor you didn't know you were building. We've been taught to worship intensity, to believe that a life well lived is a life filled with peaks, that if you're not constantly experiencing something, you're not really living. That boredom is the enemy. That stillness is stagnation. That peace is just another word for giving up. And so we chase. We create problems to solve so we can feel the rush of solving them. We manufacture drama so we can feel the catharsis of resolution. We sabotage stability because stability doesn't feel like enough. We equate depth with pain and meaning with struggle and growth with crisis. And we exhaust ourselves. We burn through relationships and careers and identities, always looking for the next thing that will make us feel real. But what if real isn't loud? What if depth isn't dramatic? What if the most profound transformation is the one that looks like nothing from the outside? What if you're not becoming less but more, and the more is just quieter than you expected? There's a woman who used to be the center of every gathering. She was funny, magnetic, always had a story. People loved being around her because she made them feel alive. But privately, she was exhausted. Every social event required her to perform. Every friendship required her to be on. She couldn't just exist. She had to be entertaining. And for years, she thought that was her personality. She thought that was who she was. Until one day, after another gathering, she sat in her car and didn't feel the usual high. She felt nothing, just tired. And she started declining invitations. Not because she was depressed, but because she didn't have the energy to be that version of herself anymore. Her friends worried. They asked if she was okay. They said she was changing, becoming distant. And she didn't know how to explain that she wasn't becoming distant. She was becoming honest. That the version of her they loved was a performance, and she couldn't keep performing. She spent months alone, not isolating in a destructive way, but genuinely resting. And slowly, something shifted. She started to feel okay with silence. Okay with being boring. Okay with not having a story. And when she did reconnect with people, it was different. She wasn't performing. She wasn't managing their experience. She was just there. And the relationships that survived that shift were the real ones. The ones that didn't need her to be anything other than what she was. Leave a comment below if this is resonating with you. Sometimes just naming the experience helps you realize you're not alone in it. You don't need to fix this. You don't need to force yourself back into the world. You don't need to override the instinct that's telling you to pull back. That instinct isn't fear. It's wisdom. It's your system recalibrating. It's your nervous system finally trusting that it doesn't need to be in constant vigilance mode, constantly managing, constantly performing, constantly proving. The part of you that's withdrawing is the part of you that's been carrying too much for too long, and it's finally setting the weight down. Let it. Don't pick it back up because other people are uncomfortable with your rest. Don't re-engage with patterns that no longer serve you just because you're afraid of disappointing people. Don't betray the quiet knowing inside you that says, this isn't your life anymore. You're not losing your social skills. You're not becoming incapable of connection. You're becoming incapable of fake connection. And yes, that means some relationships will fall away. Yes, that means some people will be confused or hurt or frustrated. Yes, that means you'll be alone more than you've ever been. But the aloneness isn't the problem. The problem was that you were surrounded by people and still felt alone, because none of them were seeing the real you. Because you weren't showing the real you. Because the real you wasn't allowed to exist in those spaces. What you're experiencing right now, this withdrawal, this silence, this pulling back, it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough disguised as loss. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. Into your actual shape, your actual rhythm, your actual needs. The version of you that needed constant external validation wasn't the healthy version. It was the adapted version. The version that learned to survive by being what others needed. The version that equated love with performance and worth with utility. That version kept you safe in a world that didn't know how to receive you as you were. But you don't live in that world anymore. Or you're starting not to. You're building a new world, an internal one, where your value isn't determined by how much you give or how entertaining you are or how well you manage other people's emotions. And that world is quiet. It's still. It's boring to anyone looking from the outside. But from the inside, it's the first place you've ever felt like you could breathe. You didn't lose something. You lost a dependence. You lost a pattern. You lost a way of being that required you to abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. You lost the need to be needed. You lost the fear of being forgotten. You lost the belief that your worth is contingent on your visibility. And what's left in the absence of those things isn't emptiness. It's space. Space for something that doesn't need to announce itself. Space for a kind of aliveness that doesn't require witnesses. Space for you, exactly as you are, without apology or explanation. This isn't the end of your capacity for connection. It's the beginning of your capacity for real connection. The kind that doesn't require you to perform. The kind that doesn't drain you. The kind that meets you where you are instead of asking you to be somewhere else. But that kind of connection can't happen until you stop chasing the old kind, until you stop trying to resurrect relationships that were built on a version of you that no longer exists, until you trust that the people who are meant to be in your life will find you, even in your silence, even in your stillness, even in your refusal to be anything other than what you are. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're not depressed. Maybe you're not antisocial or avoidant or damaged. Maybe you're just finished with a way of being that never actually fit you. Maybe the isolation isn't a problem. Maybe it's the answer. Maybe you're not empty. Maybe you're whole enough now that the things that used to fill you feel like intrusions. Maybe this is what evolution looks like when it's happening quietly. Maybe you're not pulling away from life. Maybe you're finally pulling toward it.